Well, all right. We are now going to have a offline show. I'm just sharing with you some of the amazing new slides that I got um, while I was in Europe. Not from, in this case, most of it from museums, but from my friend's library. And I just was blown away at some of the pictures I found. So then I got carried away. I wound up integrating them with the images that I have in digital form. I haven't scanned the ancient Balkans show, so there's hundreds of slides yet to be added to this. But anyway, I just wanted to show you some of the things that I ran across, not in any formal way. I don't have this show completed, but there's enough here to really look at. And so this was the new slides, not all of which are in here. There's others as well that from my collection are from a catalog of an exhibit that happened in Italy on the Cucuteni-Tripillye culture. And Cucuteni is on the Romanian side, and Tripillye is the Ukrainian name for the same cultural complex that spread across that whole expanse of southeastern Europe. And so here's a really classic form, two figurines incised with sacred patterns that are iconic for Cucuteni. And so you've got the seed and field pattern here on the belly, lots of different lines and spirals and curlicues, enhanced vulva patterns. And you can see that same figurine. This is the back view. And so spirals, double spirals actually, on the buttocks. And so there's a whole variety of these very deeply grooved figurines, highly abstracted. This one almost looks mummified. The lower part of the body is clove together. The legs are pulled tight together. This is very suggestive in some ways of Neolithic Egyptian art. Not the lines, but the single mass of the lower part of the body, which on this figurine you could almost argue it looks like labia. There's a lot of different symbolisms going on here. And the arms are usually attenuated, to say the very least, vestigial, really emphasizing the torso, the buttocks, the hips, and the faces are often abstracted as well, or just very minor. And so one of the groups of finds that happen, not just in Cucuteni-Tripillye, but throughout the Balkans region in Bulgaria, various other places, are what archaeologists refer to as assemblages. And so groups of figurines that are often provided with other furnishings, whether those are altars or chairs or bowls or sort of ritual stands, backdrops, different things. And so sitting in company with each other. Here's one of the better known ones from Romania, Soberul Zetelor. And so you can see these little horn chairs that the female figurines are seated on, and they're all kind of like in a circle. It's like sacred dolls. And you know, this is a word that used to make me cringe, but actually the idea of play being integrated as it was with the cachinas in New Mexico and Arizona, there is not necessarily a strict line between the arranging of an altar and the dreaming activity that goes on, you know, in handling figurines like this. These are painted obviously with red ochre, but you see a lot of the same kind of symbolism happening with them. And just those stools, the little seats that the figurines are seated on, they actually have also found ceramic stools with double figures usually on the back of them. These are all from Cucuteni region of Romania and Tripoli also. I think there's an example here, might have labeled here. But two female figures. And I'm thinking about this in the context of a major culture where, you know, that very word implies motherhood, but there's this other angle of view where we look at an entire generation of women of an extended family who the sisters are the mothers. There's a social motherhood aspect and not just only the biological side to it. And so that's what I see going on in this symbolism, this pair of women of a parallel generation, seeming to be. And very abstract in some of these. This one, I believe, is from Tripillye. Just the breasts. You can't really make out much of the figure other than that on it. And then also kind of altar figures, stands like this, ceremonial backgrounds, which we see in some of the assemblages also, seeming to be part of what people arranged in order to do ceremony. And again, you've got the pair here, one large and one small, so that these could be mother-daughter, possibly. I'm not even sure if this is the actual artifact. It may be, as it appears to be, a reconstruction. And then there's a whole series of ritual stands. And this is something we see a lot through the Mediterranean region, which would include the Balkans, Crete very clearly, ancient Greece to some extent, but also going over into southwestern Asia and into northeastern Africa. We find ceramic ritual stands from Kush in what's now northern Sudan. And so here we've got these, you can look at them either as the backs of women with their buttocks facing each other, or you could look at them facing out, and these are the breasts. Anyway, terracotta fired elements that were used, things were placed on top of them, bowls with offerings perhaps. And this would include also the snake tubes in Crete. So I'm going to be getting into those ritual stands a little bit more when we go into the Etruscan shofa, because I found quite a few examples of those in the museums in Italy. But anyway, here's another group from the Cucuteni culture. And here we've got the classic female forms, and then here are the male counterparts wearing baldrics. So this is something you see also in Neolithic France, something that a hunting weapon might be slung around the body with. And there's a whole fraught debate about the figurines where many archaeologists have really, in what I consider a reactionary way, tried to deny the predominance of female iconography and tried to count sex-neutral figurines as male. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't, but the emphasis on the female form remains. But I'm putting these in here just because also there are male figurines. I'm not trying to present this as a society devoid of male symbolism, but there's a very strong emphasis on the woman. And so these are some lesser artistic examples, you can see this tendency to really reduce to the abstract. You've got the pubic triangle here, not really a head or arms. You've got the legs. And on some of the examples, the area with the legs and hips here, again, looks like a vulva. And some of the figurines, you also see kind of a co-sexed thing happening where you could also interpret them as including both the male and female in some of the forms. These are kind of interesting, and these are, when you look at them at first, well, they look so much alike, but as you can see, they've broke down some of the different, I don't know why they fastened on these particular patterns, but looking at the shapes and the line patterns, you can see they're actually different figurines, but showing a very close correspondence in the way that they are incised. Here's another example where these abstract figurines, this one with the belly, kind of a seed and field motif, but really just the whole lower part of the body emphasizing the vulva. And this is, it could be also a ritual apron. You've got the string skirts context going on here also with these little fringes here. You could look at it either way, as a garment or as a vulva. This is the back view of a figurine. Made to be seated, so we're looking at the bottom in the way that it was constructed. These are the shoulders and arms, but again with the spirals on the buttocks, and yet there's this way in which this too looks like labia. Here's an example of such a seated figure, and this is very common in West Asia and Northeast Africa also, in this early, in the height of the Neolithic, where you've got these figurines that are kind of tilted backwards but seated, and often with vestigial arms, pillar heads, things like that. This one obviously shows traces of red ochre, and also they've rubbed in white clay impasto to highlight the incised patterns on her. And then Maria Gimbutas refers to a class of these. There's different styles of the figurines, but these she refers to as stiff nudes, and she associates them specifically with the aspect of death. And so a lot of them are just simply molded clay, but you can see also paint with red ochre occurring on some of them. One of the traits of these is they have piercings, and some of these may have been intended to actually suspend, maybe not the eyes, but to suspend the figurines. It looks like they might have been hung. Here, these are good examples of that. And sort of elongated bodies, you know, look at the length of these thighs, and then here's the knees. But these piercings are they really stand out. And then some other elongated figures, painted and unpainted. We're going to see a lot of these swirling spiral patterns showing up on the painted pottery vessels. So lots of variety. And one of the things to remark upon, here's some more of the male figurines, is that the variation in styles can also be due to different historical levels. I mean, there's a great deal of continuity in these cultures, but there are stylistic shifts that happen over the 1,500 to 1,000 year length of these societies, this ongoing cultural transmission. And so that's something I'll have more organized in terms of the dating of these when I complete this show, but this is just a preliminary stub show. So it's really nice to be able to have gotten some color photographs of some of these images. I'm going to show you some drawings of some of the painted pots after a while. But you've got these kind of invocatory figures, kind of similar in shape to the tall figurines we were just looking at, but the outstretched arms and these bands going down alongside her body. This one's interesting because it seems to suggest possibly a theme that you see in other very ancient art or indigenous art, which is a theme of ascending or descending generations. So that you've got what looks to be a full human figure here, but instead of a head, there's another torso and head coming out of it. And so you can sometimes see these arranged in entire rows in Australasia and a lot of different parts of the world. But it's very interesting to see the human self-representations painted by the women on their pottery. These are enclosed within these kind of chevron-shaped, that's not the word I want, lozenge-shaped enclosures, and apparently reference to the string skirt. It's not a really detailed photo, but they seem to be wearing these knee-length skirts, which we'll see examples of in a minute. Another group is both sculptured and also painted, really artistically, beautifully done, in the form of a female body. And so the vessel is her body. The offering, liquids, whatever the libation offerings, are held within her body. And so you've got the spirals going on that we're going to see recurring, but this pubic triangle is very marked in some of them. And so if we compare it to this one, you can see that these spirals kind of stand in for breasts. There's also a spiral in the belly, but you've got the legs and the vulva pretty clearly marked. This one's more abstract, but it does show a head with a face and these eyes. And then again, these spiraling loops, which could represent her arms cupping her breasts here, and then a belt and the lower body. Here's another example, even more abstract, where again you've got that central triangular element of the vulva, and then these very abstract hands cupping the breasts, and then the lip of the pot representing her neck and the head not present. Yet another group of ceremonial vessels are in the shape of breasts. And so some unpainted like this one, maybe those are older, looks like it could be, and others are very elaborately painted in red ochre and lamp black primarily. And lots of different symbols. We see these coursing water signs, snake signs, make of them what you will. And there are other styles of breast pots that are not painted, but just incised. I have more like this that need to be scanned. And then another group of symbols, to me, evoke vulvas, even unto the red slit cut down the middle of some of them. But this pattern shows up a lot in Cucuteni art, and we see it sometimes flanking the figures. Here's a figure of a woman wearing one of these string skirts that Elizabeth Barber talks about, and something that we know that goes back to the Paleolithic and is found in many other parts of the world. This particular gesture, again, I'm very happy this is in color for once, but the woman with one hand on her hip and the other hand pointing or holding her hand to her forehead, which is exactly the ritual gesture we see in Crete several thousand years later. Another form of the vulva symbolism, to my mind, we see a very characteristic shape that is surrounded by these resonant fields of vibration, the lines around it, and also snake or snaky patterns. Here's another one that really clearly demarks a central vulva element, and then the pulsating patterns kind of resonating and vibrating around it in the upper field of this pot. And then you've got this whole other group of more, I wouldn't exactly say rectangular, but linear patterns in the body of this giant vessel, maybe a water vessel. And so spirals, some of the masterpieces of Cucuteni art are these double spirals. And I'm calling them double spirals because if you originate from the central point, you can go out in one direction or you can go out in the other direction. And so this is something you see a lot in Neolithic art, many, many places. The Cycladic Islands, China, I don't even want to try to list, Costa Rica. But really beautiful, fine examples of ceramic art painting. And so here's another example where, again, these could also be equated to snakes. I mean, the symbolic world of the creators of these, you know, what did this mean to them? Is this the cyclicity of life? Is this the flow of water? You know, serpents, there's a lot of different ways of looking at it. This one has the double spirals, and it also has very clear vulva signs. I mean, the recurrence of the vulva is pretty marked in the Cucuteni art. And these eyes could also be exchanged symbolically for vulvas if you want to go there. But really brilliant color, as you can see on some of these. Here again, the double spiral or intertwined snakes. And here's an example that is both carved and painted very beautifully. You can see that they've incised openings in the pot so that a cord could be passed around it, maybe for gathering water or for hanging it up in the house. Here it is again. A little bit of the view of the painted interior. So there's just loads of this. This is clearly, you know, the concepts of primitive art that we were all taught back in the day are just so. I think that Maria Gimbutas really was right about the idea. This is a civilization. It is not. It is a classical world of its own. We were taught to think of antiquity as the Greeks and Romans, and that they were the classical cultures, and they defined what classical culture was. In fact, patriarchy defined what classical culture was. But this is something extremely artistic and rich and developed and profoundly elaborate in its symbol systems across various mediums and types of objects, whether they're vessels or figurines or other kinds of ceremonial regalia. But you know, it's clearly an evolution that grew up over thousands of years of time and then was sustained for that same length. And so, you know, you can even see elements here of the yin yang where you've got the dot in the opposite fields. But the serpentine patterns recur a lot. And so this is from the Tripillye culture. I'm still trying to get site identification on a lot of these images because just getting color pictures of them is enough, although thank you, Internet, for that. But serpents are another theme that come through, and it's kind of interesting because often they occur along with quadrants of the directions. A variety of different combinations, actually, because we also see them with lunar crescents. You could argue for this for being a vulva sign with a serpent down the middle of it. Same thing here. And this also looks like a vulva sign to me, but then maybe these are solar discs, or could they be eyes? There's just that multiplicity of symbolic potential meanings that we're looking at here. The zigzags, the quadrants, the vulvas, the spirals, the solar flares, these kinds of parallel swooping lines. I remember reading Maria Gimbutas talking about those as possibly having to do with sheets of rain. Here's an example from the Ukraine, and this is quite old, so maybe representing the earlier period. And then a little bit later, you see a lot of these kinds of dog figures or whatever they are. I've seen them discussed as dogs, painted on the art, as well as animal pots. And this particular style of effigy vessel is something that not only occurs in the Balkans, but over much of Europe, Egypt. You see it as far away in Asia as Vietnam. It's all over Argentina and South America and Missouri, and it's just like a very widespread theme. And also these little bull-wheeled cart toy animal things. So just coming back to the painted pottery, this is a lot of times what you see is, and in a way it's helpful because what they do is they've spread out the whole span of the pot. They just kind of rolled it out so you could get the overall impression. But it's a drawing, it's not a photograph, so, you know, it necessarily flattens it in some ways. But you've got these same vulva-like enclosures with figures of women inside of them, sometimes in pairs, which may be mother and daughter based on the size. There's our string skirt happening again. Pot on top of the head. The gesture of veneration, more string skirts. And all these are from a Russian archaeological study that I went through. So a good view of the string skirts happening here. Again, mother-daughter pairings. And even some of these are also incised rather than painted. Here's another one. Let me see how common the hand to the forehead gesture is. Nice, nice string skirt. And we get here in color, see the difference, but rows of dancers who seem to be arm in arm wearing their string skirts. And these may represent the males based on the differential of the way the figurines are represented. Emphasis on the hips with the women, possibly. But back to the ritual stands. So the spirals, and there may have been an interplay. I found examples in northern Nigeria of terracotta stands that were used to place water pots on as part of the house furniture. They were breasted, actually, as well. And so this symbolism of nurturing, life-giving, water, motherhood, woman's body, all kind of at play. And so, you know, this part here could have been a water jar. I don't know on some of these if these are detachable or not. But anyway, a way to make things stand up at a certain level. And so this one, a lot of times what you see with the snake tubes in Crete is they would place a wide flat bowl across the top of these. But in the Balkans, there seems to have been a custom of pouring libation into these kinds of containers, some of which, and I was just told this in Rome by the person whose book I got this picture from, that some of these have open bottoms, so they aren't really vessels at all. And it may be that the libation was poured directly into the earth through them. So that's something I'm kind of looking at. But these are some good examples of the ritual stands. These greatly predate the snake tubes that we know not only from Crete, but also the ones in ancient Canaanite society at Bet Sha'an, some of the most famous examples that probably inspired the Cretan ones that we know about. And here again, this is the kind of double vessel that Alberto Castagnola told me that they're bottomless. So that's sort of interesting to think about the libation going straight into the ground. This is kind of interesting, this little bridge area here with the vulva portal. And so, as has been remarked by more than one archaeologist, the kernos that we know of from the Eleusinian Mysteries, which is a pot that has many little sub openings, spouts, I guess you could say, for offerings, is predated by thousands of years in these old Balkan Neolithic contexts and other places too in the Mediterranean. And so libation vessels. And then the last thing I want to look at here is the model temples. And so this is really interesting to me because these occur a lot in the Balkans, and you have these horns or these lunar crescents at the crest of the roof. These are believed to be based on house design, and they could also be small shrines that offerings were placed into within the ceremonies that people carried out. This appears to show the head of a horned animal. And so you also have these interesting horn-crested house models from burials of the Etruscans. And so there's a lot of variety among them, and these are a little bit different. There's a huge time difference between these, like 4,000 years, maybe in that range. And you have many horns instead of just the horns at the end. But it's kind of interesting to see, because I don't know of these kinds of, there's not a lot of examples that I can think of archaeologically of clay shrines or house models like this, except in Southern Europe. And the idea, I don't know if we can say that there's a cultural continuity, but just sort of interesting that this theme recurs in the Etruscan culture into the Bronze Age. So you have in the Iron Age after it, here the horns have become serpents, and this is said to be a sunboat motif. So you've got actually the oars, and this is bound up with the idea of the voyage of the dead, because these are found in necropolises and burial mounds and so forth. But kind of interesting to see variations on those themes out of the Etruscan world. And my last image for you here is this beautiful breasted vessel that I saw in a museum in Rome. This is from the Archaic period. I didn't label this, but it's about 800 BCE, maybe even 850. And so these characteristic incised patterns belong to that period. But the breasts, we see before the Villanova period that precedes the classic Etruscan civilization, around 1300, 1200 BCE, and even earlier. In northern Italy, there was something called the Terramari culture, and it had relatives going all the way up into Slovakia in Central Europe that had breastpots were one of the main archaeological signatures of these societies. And so it's kind of interesting because there was a lot of interplay of the Etruscans with those Central European societies in the Iron Age, beginnings of the Iron Age, to see that, you know, those breasts, I mean, this is not something I've seen a lot of examples of in Etruscan art, but here this is little bit of matrifocal symbolism that persisted there. Okay, so I'm going to upload this for you all to look at your leisure, and I hope you enjoyed it.